In our lives, there are moments when the weight of the world feels almost impossible to carry. We struggle, we break, and sometimes we forget that even in the deepest darkness, Allah has placed for us a light that never dims. That light is His word. And when the heart trembles, when fear rises, when the soul feels weak, there is a surah in the Qur'an that doesn't just comfort you. It strengthens you from the inside out. It speaks to the part of you that no one else sees, the part that silently endures, the part that longs for reassurance from the one who created you. This surah reminds you that strength is not loud, it is not forceful. It is the quiet certainty that Allah is with you. And when He is with you, no burden is too heavy, no storm is too strong, and no night is too long. This surah comes into your life like a divine whisper, wrapping your heart with courage, teaching you resilience and reminding you that even in your weakest moment, you are never alone. There are moments in life when your heart bends under the weight of what you're carrying. You wake up with a heaviness you cannot explain, and you go to sleep wondering if anyone truly understands the battle happening inside your soul. It is in these moments that Allah, in His infinite mercy, guides your gaze back to His words, reminding you that strength is not something you chase in the world. Strength is something He places inside you. And among the countless treasures in the Qur'an, there is a surah that feels as though it was crafted for the weary heart, the struggling soul, the believer standing at the edge of breaking. This surah does not shout its message. It breathes it gently into your chest, almost like a divine whisper reminding you that what you fear, what you struggle with, what you feel you cannot endure, Allah has already accounted for it. He has already placed within you the strength needed to overcome it. He has already written your capacity, your resilience, and your healing, even before the trial reached you. And this surah is a reminder of that truth. What makes the words of Allah unlike anything else is that they speak to every layer of your being at once. They speak to your logic, your emotions, your fears, your hopes, and your unseen wounds. And when this surah enters your life, it doesn't just speak to your surface. It speaks to the parts of you that you rarely admit even to yourself. It speaks to the part of you that feels small, the part that wonders why life feels so heavy, the part that silently asks, how do I keep going? This surah answers you not by promising a life without trials, but by showing you a heart that can withstand them. It teaches you that strength is not the absence of pain, but the presence of Allah in your pain. It teaches you that courage is not something you must build alone. It is something Allah breathes into you when your own breath feels too weak. There are verses in this surah that make your heart tremble, not with fear, but with recognition, the kind of recognition that only truth can awaken. It tells you that your struggle is not unnoticed, your tears are not unseen, your effort is not forgotten. It reminds you that weakness is not a flaw, it is the place where Allah's strength descends. It reminds you that the softness of your heart is not a sign of fragility, but a sign of your connection to Him. And when you take the time to let its meaning settle into your soul, you begin to feel something shift inside you. You begin to feel a strength that does not come from muscles or confidence or worldly security, but from surrender, from trust, from knowing that Allah is the one holding every thread of your story. This surah tells the believer that Allah knows the weight they carry, and He knows how that weight feels on the heart. He knows the nights you lie awake, the days you go through on autopilot, the moments when words fail you. And in His knowing, He does not leave you empty-handed. He gives you verses that hold you, verses that act like a shelter when the world feels cold. Verses that wrap around your heart the way a warm cloak wraps around someone trembling in the wind. This surah teaches you that no matter how heavy the test, Allah has already placed within you a strength proportional to it. The challenge only reveals what He has planted in you, the unseen courage you didn't know you had, the hope that quietly refuses to die, the faith that flickers even when everything else seems dark. There are days when you feel spiritually exhausted, not because you don't believe, but because you are tired of trying, tired of waiting, tired of holding on to faith when your circumstances seem unmoved. This surah understands that exhaustion. It speaks to it with compassion, as though telling you, I know you are tired, but look at who sustains you. Look at who carries you. Look at who has never abandoned you, not even for a heartbeat. Look at the one who brought you through what you thought would break you. Look at the moments you survived, even when you whispered to yourself that you couldn't handle another blow. This surah becomes a mirror, reflecting back to you a version of yourself that you had forgotten. Resilient, held by Allah, stronger than the fears that grip you, and anchored by divine words that can never be shaken. When you reflect on the verses of this surah, you realize that strength is not something you ask the world for. You realize it is something you receive from the one who created strength itself. And this surah teaches you that true strength is spiritual before it is emotional or physical. It begins inside, in the place where sincerity lives, where reliance on Allah grows, where trust blossoms even when the path ahead is unclear. This surah cleans the lens of the heart so you can see that behind every difficulty lies a purpose. Behind every delay lies a divine calculation. And behind every pain lies the opportunity to grow closer to the one who never disappoints. One of the most beautiful aspects of this surah is how it holds you in conversations you are too overwhelmed to have with anyone else. It acknowledges your fears without judging them. It acknowledges your doubt without condemning it. It acknowledges your pain without telling you to simply be strong. Instead, it reminds you where real strength flows from. It reminds you that even prophets experienced fear and sadness, and yet Allah strengthened them through revelation. So when you recite this surah, you are not just reading words, you are connecting yourself to a lineage of believers who overcame the impossible, because Allah filled them with a strength no worldly force could extinguish. This surah becomes like a companion in your solitude, a guide in your confusion, a comfort in your distress. It teaches you that strength is found in surrendering to Allah's wisdom, even when your heart aches. It teaches you that strength comes from patience, from trust, from remembering that what is written for you will never pass you and what is not meant for you will never reach you. It teaches you that your relationship with Allah is the greatest source of power you will ever have. And when its verses settle into your soul, you start to see yourself differently. You start to see that you are stronger than you give yourself credit for. You start to see that everything you endured was shaping you, purifying you, elevating you through tests that were designed not to break you, but to build you. This surah is not just a reminder of strength, it is a reminder of who gives strength. It reminds you that Allah equips the believer with resilience at the moment they feel weakest. It reminds you that the heart connected to Allah is unshakable, even when the body trembles. It reminds you that as long as you turn to Him, as long as you call upon Him, as long as you anchor yourself in His words, you carry a power within you that no hardship can erase. It reminds you that every test carried wisdom, every tear counted, every prayer heard, every step guided. And the more you live with this surah, the more you realize that strength was never something external to be found. It was something Allah placed inside you from the beginning. Something this surah awakened. Something His words nurtured. Something His mercy sustained. Something His promise preserved. There are moments in life when hardship feels like it is pressing into your chest, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to think, and difficult to believe that anything will ever feel light again. You wake up carrying weight that others cannot see, and you move through the day as though you are dragging invisible chains. Hardship has a way of isolating you, making you feel as though the world keeps moving while you stand still, trapped in your own storm. But there is something profoundly transformative that happens when the heart encounters a surah in the Qur'an that was sent by Allah as a mercy, a reminder, a healing. This surah does not erase your hardship, but it changes the way you carry it. It lifts the burden not by removing the challenge, but by strengthening the heart that holds it. It allows you to walk through difficulty with a sense of inner peace that does not come from circumstances, but from connection to the one who controls those circumstances. When you allow this surah to truly sink into your heart, it begins to shift the way you see your hardship. Suddenly, what once felt like punishment begins to look like preparation. What once felt like chaos begins to reveal signs of divine orchestration. What once felt like abandonment starts to feel like a chapter in a story written by a Lord who knows exactly what you need to grow. Hardship becomes lighter not because it becomes easier, but because your heart starts to trust that there is meaning behind every moment you endure. When you recite this surah, you feel as though Allah is speaking directly to your situation, directly to your fears, directly to your doubts. You feel understood in a way no human can ever understand you. You feel seen by the one who sees every tear before it falls, every sigh before you release it, every silent prayer you send, even when your voice trembles. As you reflect on this surah, you begin to understand that hardship is not a sign that Allah is distant from you, but a sign that He is drawing you closer. Hardship is often the moment when the heart becomes humbly aware of its need for Allah, when the believer realizes that they cannot carry life alone. And this surah meets you in that vulnerability, not with judgment, not with pressure, but with divine comfort. It tells you that Allah has never left you. It tells you that every difficulty you face was written with a wisdom greater than your understanding. It tells you that your struggle is purposeful, your tears are purposeful, your waiting is purposeful. And the moment your heart absorbs this truth, your hardship begins to feel lighter because it no longer feels random. It feels guided. It feels designed. It feels held. There is something unimaginable that takes place inside a believer when their heart connects deeply with the words of Allah. This surah becomes like a lantern in the darkness, illuminating paths you couldn't see before. Hardship often creates darkness within us, not darkness of disbelief, but darkness of confusion, uncertainty, fear, exhaustion. You feel as though your inner world has dimmed. But when you recite this surah, the light it brings is not like the light of the world, which flickers and fades. It is the kind of light that settles into your chest and stays with you, even long after the recitation is over. It is a light that protects you from the despair that hardship tries to plant inside your soul. It is a light that reassures you that even when your life feels uncertain, your Lord remains certain. This surah reminds you that hardship is not meant to break you, but to polish you, cleanse you, elevate you, shape you into someone capable of receiving blessings that were always written for you, but not yet suitable for you. Hardship becomes lighter because your perspective shifts from why this to what is Allah teaching me through this. And that single shift changes everything. The same storm that once felt suffocating now becomes part of the wind that pushes you closer to your purpose. The same challenge that once made you feel weak now becomes a source of deep spiritual strength. The same pain that once felt unbearable now becomes a doorway to deeper relationship with Allah. Hardship becomes lighter not because it ends, but because this surah aligns your heart with the one who manages all hardships with mercy. This surah teaches the believer that nothing they face is wasted. Every difficulty carries knowledge you didn't know you needed. Every delay carries protection you didn't realize was saving you. Every disappointment redirects you to something better. And the more you immerse yourself in the meanings of this surah, the more your heart begins to recognize these truths not only intellectually, but emotionally. You begin to feel the calm that comes from surrendering to Allah's wisdom. You begin to feel peace in knowing that Allah never tests a heart without also strengthening it. You begin to feel hope in situations that once felt hopeless, not because circumstances have changed, but because your trust in Allah has expanded in ways you couldn't have imagined before. The heart connected to this surah becomes softer, yet stronger. It becomes gentle with itself, no longer blaming itself for being tired, no longer viewing its struggles as weaknesses, but understanding that the capacity to endure hardship is itself a sign of Allah's care. Hardship becomes lighter when the heart stops fighting what Allah has decreed and begins embracing it as part of a journey crafted by a Lord who loves you more than you can comprehend. When the heart learns to accept, to trust, to surrender, hardship loses its heaviness because you are no longer carrying it alone. You recognize that Allah is carrying you through it, guiding you through it, teaching you through it, and opening doors through it that you didn't even know existed. Sometimes hardship feels heavy because we try to navigate it with our minds instead of our hearts. We overthink, we overanalyze, we try to control what is uncontrollable. But this surah teaches you to approach hardship through the heart, through remembrance, through reflection, through connection. And when the heart leads, peace follows. The surah reminds you that no difficulty comes without relief written beside it. No test comes without ease woven into it. No pain comes without healing on the way. When you internalize this reality, the fear wrapped around your hardship begins to dissolve. You no longer worry about how things will unfold. You simply trust that however they unfold, Allah will be there. And that truth removes weights you didn't even know you were carrying. Hardship becomes lighter when you realize that Allah knows the exact moment relief will arrive. He knows when your heart has absorbed the lesson it needed. He knows when you are ready for the next chapter. And until that moment comes, He sustains you with this surah, with His words, with the tranquility that descends upon a believer who recites with sincerity. This surah becomes a reminder that patience is not passive. Patience is active trust. Patience is choosing to believe that Allah has not forgotten you even when your life feels suspended between hope and difficulty. Patience is believing that His timing is perfect even when your own desires feel urgent. Patience is knowing that what He withholds is sometimes a form of giving. As you continue reflecting on this surah, you start to see that hardship is lighter because Allah accompanies you through every step of it. You are never walking alone. You are never enduring alone. You are never praying alone. You are never crying alone. You are never lost without guidance, never hurt without healing, never tested without support. And when the heart truly feels this closeness, hardship transforms from something that crushes you into something that shapes you. You begin to see that strength is not born from ease, but from the way Allah strengthens your heart through every challenge. You begin to realize that the believer who holds on to Allah's words cannot be defeated by any hardship because they carry within them a divine resilience that cannot be shaken. This surah enters your life like a reminder that Allah knows your limits better than you do. He knows what you can handle and what you cannot. He knows what will refine you and what will ruin you. He knows what will bring you closer and what will distract you. Hardship becomes lighter when you trust that Allah calculates every detail of your life with exact precision, with perfect mercy, with infinite wisdom. You stop fearing the unknown because you know who controls the unknown. You stop fearing the future because you know who designs the future. You stop fearing loss because you know the one who can replace anything you lose with something far better. What makes this surah so powerful is that it teaches you that hardship is not the enemy. The real heaviness comes from resisting what Allah has decreed. Once your heart stops resisting and begins trusting, begins flowing with the decree instead of fighting against it, even the greatest hardship becomes bearable. You begin to smile through pain, not because the pain disappears, but because your heart has discovered a deeper truth, that Allah is enough. And when Allah is enough, life cannot overwhelm you. When Allah is enough, fear cannot control you. When Allah is enough, hardship becomes a vehicle of growth rather than a weapon of destruction. This surah gives you the language your soul needs to speak to Allah when you are confused, hurt, or overwhelmed. It reminds you that you do not need to be strong on your own. You do not need to pretend. You do not need to mask your struggles. Allah sees you exactly as you are, fragile, hopeful, tired, persevering, and He strengthens you through His words. He gives you peace through His remembrance. He gives you clarity through reflection. He gives you comfort through closeness. He gives you resilience through faith. And as you continue to return to this surah day after day, moment after moment, you realize that hardship is no longer something you dread. It becomes something you face with a heart steady in its trust, a soul anchored in its connection to Allah, and a mind that knows that Allah never burdens a believer except to raise them, purify them, and elevate them. There is a place inside every human being where fear lives quietly, sometimes loudly, but always present. It shows up in moments you expect and in moments you don't. Fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of heartbreak, fear of uncertainty, fear of the future, fear of what has already happened and what might still come. These fears sit in the corners of your heart like shadows that follow you even when the sun is shining. And often, you try to fight them on your own. You try to be strong, to appear composed, to convince yourself that you can control every outcome. But the heart knows when fear is present, and no amount of pretending can silence the whisper inside you that says, what if? What if things don't work out? What if you can't handle what's coming? What if you're not enough? And it is in these most vulnerable moments that this surah becomes a lifeline. It enters your heart softly, and instead of silencing your fear with force, it transforms it with truth. This surah reminds you that fear was never meant to be carried alone. It reminds you that Allah knows every fear you hide behind a smile, every worry you bury beneath your routines, every trembling thought you push aside so others don't see how much you carry. It doesn't tell you that you're wrong for being afraid. It doesn't tell you that fear is a sign of weak faith. Instead, it teaches you that fear is a place where trust begins. It teaches you that weakness is the doorway through which Allah sends you strength. It teaches you that vulnerability is not a sign of spiritual failure, but a sign of spiritual opening. When the heart is cracked by fear, it becomes more receptive to light. And the surah brings that light in a way that is gentle enough not to overwhelm you, but strong enough to lift you. There is something powerful that happens when you recite the verses of this surah while your heart is frightened. You begin to feel calm, settle over you, like a wave that washes away everything you thought was too heavy to handle. The words remind you that you were never meant to navigate life by your own strength. You were never meant to carry your fears without divine help. You were never meant to rely solely on your limited understanding, your fragile control, your human capabilities. This surah teaches you that trust is not a feeling but a choice. It is the choice to lean on Allah even when every part of you feels unsure. It is the choice to believe His promise even when the path ahead is dark. It is the choice to surrender what scares you into the hands of the one who already knows the outcome. As you reflect deeper on the meanings of this surah, you start to notice how every verse guides you toward a heart that is anchored, steady, and protected. It speaks about Allah's knowledge, His nearness, His mercy, His power, His timing. And when these truths sink into your soul, fear begins to lose its grip. You start to feel a quiet strength emerging within you, one that does not come from confidence in yourself, but from confidence in Allah. You realize that fear often comes from imagining futures where Allah is not present, where you face things alone, where everything depends on you. But this surah reminds you that such futures do not exist. There is no moment you will face without Allah. There is no place you will go where He is absent. There is no hardship that arrives without His knowledge, and no relief that comes without His mercy. The transformation begins slowly. You notice that your breathing becomes steadier when you recite this surah. Your thoughts become softer. Your heart stops racing at the same pace. You begin to view your fears from a different angle, not as threats, but as invitations. Invitations to trust, to return, to surrender, to let go of illusions of control. Fear becomes lighter because it becomes understood. You recognize that your fear is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that you are human, and that humans were created to lean on Allah. You realize that you were not created to be fearless. You were created to be faithful. And that shift changes everything. This surah teaches you about a form of strength that is different from the world's definition. The world tells you that strength means never being afraid, never showing emotion, never breaking. But Allah shows you through this surah that true strength is the ability to turn to Him even when fear is loud. Strength is the courage to say, Ya Allah, I cannot do this without you. Strength is the humility to admit your dependence, to recognize your limits, to acknowledge that you do not have control, but you know the one who does. Strength is not loud or aggressive. It is quiet, rooted, steady. It is the kind of strength that grows in hearts that trust Allah deeply, consistently, and sincerely. When you continue reciting the surah in moments of distress, you begin to feel your heart expanding. The tightness that fear once created begins to loosen. The walls you built to protect yourself begin to soften. The defensive posture you took against life begins to lower. Not because your challenges disappear, but because your connection to Allah becomes stronger than the challenges. You start to feel a resilience that surprises even you. Suddenly, things that once terrified you begin to feel manageable. Situations that once made you panic now feel like tests you can navigate. The unknown no longer feels like a threat. It becomes a space where Allah's plan unfolds, where His mercy operates, where His wisdom becomes visible. This surah trains your heart not to fear the future, but to trust the one who shapes it. It trains your heart not to fear loss, but to trust that what Allah takes, He replaces with something better. It trains your heart not to fear change, but to trust that every change carries purpose. It trains your heart not to fear disappointment, but to trust that Allah's protection sometimes looks like things not going your way. And as you internalize these lessons, fear begins to melt into trust. Weakness begins to transform into spiritual strength. Moments of panic turn into moments of dua. Moments of anxiety turn into moments of reflection. Moments of despair turn into moments of remembrance. This surah reminds you that Allah knows what scares you. He knows the thoughts you never say aloud. He knows the scenarios your mind creates at night. He knows the wounds you carry from your past. He knows the people you fear losing. He knows the uncertainties that shake you. And He does not dismiss your fear. He answers it. He comforts it. He soothes it. He reassures it. This surah becomes a refuge, a spiritual shelter where your heart can rest, even when life is chaotic. It becomes the place where you breathe again, where you gather yourself, where you remember that you are not alone and never will be. The more you stay connected to this surah, the more you realize that trust in Allah is not something you develop in a single moment. It is something you cultivate through every fear, every test, every prayer, every verse. And slowly, trust begins to shape your identity. You begin to walk with a calmer heart. You begin to speak with gentler words. You begin to move with more certainty. Not because life becomes predictable, but because you become anchored. You realize that Allah did not send fear into your life to weaken you, but to guide you to a strength that cannot be shaken by anything in this world. This surah teaches you that faith is not the absence of fear. Faith is choosing Allah over fear. Faith is walking into the unknown with the one who knows it. Faith is holding on even when your hands feel weak. Faith is allowing Allah to carry what you cannot. Faith is understanding that the heart that trusts Allah is unbreakable because it is held by the one who never lets go. This surah becomes a spiritual training ground where your fear is transformed, where your weakness becomes strength, where your doubt becomes clarity, where your despair becomes hope, where your anxiety becomes peace, where your trembling becomes steadiness. You learn that it is not the absence of hardship that makes you strong. It is the presence of Allah within the hardship. You learn that resilience is not built by avoiding pain, but by navigating it with a heart connected to divine truth. You learn that strength is not about holding everything together. It is about allowing Allah to hold you together. You begin to see that every fear you face becomes a teacher. Every moment of vulnerability becomes an opportunity. Every trembling prayer becomes a step closer to Allah. And this surah becomes the companion that guides you through all of it, reminding you again and again that you were never meant to live in fear. You were meant to live in trust. You were meant to live with a heart that knows its Lord, relies on its Lord, and finds its courage through its Lord. You were meant to become strong, not because life is easy, but because your connection to Allah is deep, sincere, and unshakable.